Eleanor Mitchell, 32, never expected her family's Christmas dinner to end with her mother in tears and the family's decades-old secret exposed. What started as a traditional holiday gathering quickly unraveled when her mother's cruel words, "We're ashamed of you," pushed Eleanor to finally reveal the truth she'd discovered in her father's study 3 months earlier. The aftermath would forever change the Mitchell family dynamic and prove that sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply speaking your truth. Before I continue this family revenge drama that shook my entire world, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy stories about family secrets and justice served. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this holiday confrontation leads to the most satisfying karma I've ever witnessed. Now, let's dive into how it all began. Growing up in Asheville, North Carolina, Eleanor Mitchell had always been the perfect daughter in a seemingly perfect family. Her childhood home sat on a tree-lined street in a respectable neighborhood where her father, Richard Mitchell, was a well-regarded cardiologist at the regional medical center, and her mother, Victoria, was the quintessential doctor's wife, involved in charity work, garden clubs, and maintaining impeccable social connections. Eleanor had a younger brother, Thomas, who was 4 years her junior. While Thomas received praise for his athletic abilities and easygoing nature, Eleanor was valued for her academic achievements, responsible demeanor, and willingness to follow the path her parents had carefully laid out for her. She excelled in school, participated in the right extracurricular activities, attended the college her parents had chosen, and even pursued a career in hospital administration, adjacent to her father's medical world but never threatening to outshine him. "Eleanor has always been so sensible," Victoria would often say at social gatherings, her hand resting proprietarily on Eleanor's shoulder. "She knows her strengths and plays to them." The comment always came with a smile, but Eleanor eventually recognized the subtle undercurrent: stay in your lane, don't rock the boat, fulfill our expectations. For years, Eleanor had accepted this role, finding comfort in meeting expectations and receiving her parents' approval. She dated men they approved of, lived in an apartment in a neighborhood they found suitable, and called home twice a week with appropriate updates on her orderly life. The Mitchell family presented a united front at community events, holiday gatherings, and family vacations, a portrait of upper-middle-class success and harmony. But beneath this polished exterior, Eleanor had always sensed something wasn't quite right. There were whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. There were family photo albums with pages mysteriously removed. There were relatives who seemed to know things about the family history that Eleanor did not. Most troubling were the occasional comments her mother would make when displeased, subtle references to how Eleanor took after her grandmother Judith, always delivered with a grimace of distaste. When Eleanor would ask about this grandmother, who had died before she was born, her questions were deflected or dismissed. "Some things are better left in the past," her mother would say firmly. "Judith made her choices, and we've moved on." The mysterious grandmother became a shadowy figure in Eleanor's mind, someone whose mere mention could cause her mother's expression to harden and her father to suddenly remember an urgent call he needed to make. This unspoken family history hung in the air throughout Eleanor's childhood and early adulthood, but her attempts to learn more were always rebuffed. The perfect daughter didn't ask uncomfortable questions. The perfect daughter accepted the narrative she was given. The perfect daughter maintained the family image. Until 3 months ago, when Eleanor's carefully constructed understanding of her family began to unravel. Her father had experienced a minor heart scare, ironic for a cardiologist, and Eleanor had rushed back to the family home to help her mother organize his medical information. While searching for his insurance documents in his study, she had accidentally knocked over a stack of files from the top shelf of his closet. As she gathered the scattered papers, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between 2 folders. The headline caught her attention immediately: "Local woman fights for environmental justice against medical waste scandal." The photograph showed a woman with Eleanor's same deep-set eyes and determined expression, identified as Judith Mitchell, testifying at a county hearing. The article, dated 1983, detailed how this woman, Eleanor's mysterious grandmother, had organized a community coalition to expose illegal medical waste dumping that was contaminating the local water supply. With trembling hands, Eleanor read about how Judith Mitchell had uncovered evidence that several prominent doctors at the regional hospital, including her own son-in-law, had invested in a disposal company that was cutting corners to save costs, resulting in toxic chemicals leaching into groundwater. Eleanor felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. Her father, the respected Dr. Richard Mitchell, had been implicated in an environmental scandal by his own mother-in-law, Eleanor's grandmother. This was why Judith was never discussed. This was why her mother tensed at any mention of her own mother. This was the family secret. That evening, Eleanor slipped the clipping into her purse, her mind racing with questions. But she said nothing to her parents, instead watching them with new eyes as they moved through their carefully curated lives, wondering what other secrets lurked beneath the surface of the Mitchell family's perfect image. The yellowed newspaper clipping became Eleanor's portal into a hidden family history. Over the next 3 months, she conducted a meticulous investigation, using her lunch breaks and evenings to piece together the truth about her grandmother Judith and the medical waste scandal that had been deliberately erased from the family narrative. Eleanor started at the local library, scrolling through microfiche archives of the Asheville Citizen-Times from the early 1980s. What she found was a series of articles documenting a David versus Goliath battle that had captivated the region for nearly a year. Judith Mitchell, then in her late 50s, had noticed an unusual number of illnesses in her neighborhood, particularly among children. After one child was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, Judith began connecting dots that others had missed. The articles portrayed a woman of remarkable courage and intellect. Judith had initially tried working through official channels, filing complaints with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Health Department. When those efforts were stonewalled, she began her own investigation, collecting water samples, documenting illness clusters, and following disposal trucks in the early morning hours. Mrs. Mitchell arrived at yesterday's county hearing with 3 boxes of meticulously organized evidence, one article reported. She presented water sample results, employee testimonies, and financial records showing the connection between Piedmont Disposal Services and a group of investors that includes several prominent physicians from Regional Medical Center. Eleanor felt a chill as she read her father's name listed among those investors. According to the articles, the doctors had claimed they were passive investors with no knowledge of the company's illegal practices. But Judith had uncovered internal memos suggesting otherwise. The conflict had torn the family apart. One particularly painful article included a quote from Victoria Mitchell, Eleanor's mother, publicly denouncing her own mother, "My husband is a healer who has saved countless lives." These baseless accusations are coming from a woman who has always craved attention and drama. Our family stands firmly behind Dr. Mitchell and his colleagues. The investigation had eventually resulted in fines for the disposal company, but the physician investors had emerged largely unscathed, protected by carefully worded denials and the influence they wielded in the community. Judith, however, had been ostracized. The final article Eleanor found noted that Judith Mitchell had moved to Oregon, where she lived until her death 15 years later. Eleanor's research didn't stop with newspaper archives. She took a day off work to visit the county courthouse, where she reviewed the environmental case files that remained public record. There she found even more damning evidence, lab reports showing dangerous levels of medical waste chemicals in the groundwater, internal company emails discussing how to avoid costly disposal regulations, and financial statements showing how profitable these shortcuts had been for investors. Most disturbing was a handwritten note she found in the case file, apparently submitted by her grandmother but never published in the news accounts. In it, Judith wrote, "My son-in-law, Dr. Richard Mitchell, confided in me when he first joined this investment group. He specifically mentioned that the high returns were possible because of innovative cost-cutting measures in waste disposal. When I expressed concern, he assured me it was all technically legal. I now realize he was fully aware of what was happening but chose profit over public health. Eleanor made copies of everything, creating her own meticulously organized file that she kept locked in her desk drawer at home. Each document added another crack to the perfect family image she had believed in her entire life. The final piece came when Eleanor tracked down Rachel Winters, a former environmental activist who had worked closely with Judith during the scandal. Now in her 70s, Rachel lived in a small apartment filled with books and mementos from various social justice campaigns. When Eleanor introduced herself, Rachel's eyes widened in recognition. "You have her eyes, you know," Rachel said, studying Eleanor's face. "Judith was so proud of you, even though they wouldn't let her see you." Over tea, Rachel filled in the human details that weren't captured in newspaper accounts or legal documents. How Judith had received anonymous threats during the investigation. How Victoria had changed the locks on the family home when Judith refused to drop her campaign. How Richard had used his medical connections to suggest Judith was becoming mentally unstable. "The last time I saw your grandmother," Rachel told Eleanor, "she showed me a birthday card she had bought for you. You were turning 5. She knew she wouldn't be allowed to give it to you, but she bought it anyway. Inside, she wrote about how she hoped someday you would know the truth and understand why she had to do what she did." Eleanor left Rachel's apartment with tears streaming down her face, clutching a photograph the older woman had given her, a picture of Judith Mitchell standing proudly in front of a newly planted community garden that had been created on remediated land after the waste was properly cleaned up. That evening, Eleanor sat in her apartment surrounded by the evidence she had gathered, finally understanding the weight of the family secret she had uncovered. Her father, the man she had admired her entire life, had knowingly participated in actions that had endangered people's health for financial gain. Her mother had chosen loyalty to her husband over the truth, cutting off her own mother and constructing an elaborate family mythology that painted Judith as the villain rather than the hero she truly was. For 3 months, Eleanor had carried this knowledge, unsure what to do with it. She had considered confronting her parents directly but hesitated, partly out of lingering respect and partly out of fear of shattering the relationship entirely. The approaching Christmas holiday had seemed like both the worst and somehow the most appropriate time to address the deception that had shaped her entire life. Little did she know that her mother's cutting remark at the dinner table would make the decision for her, unleashing decades of suppressed truth in a single, devastating moment. The weeks leading up to Christmas had been increasingly tense for Eleanor. Carrying the weight of what she had discovered about her family's past made every interaction with her parents feel like navigating a minefield. Their weekly phone calls became exercises in restraint as Eleanor bit back questions and accusations, responding with practiced pleasantries while her mind screamed for honesty. Her father had fully recovered from his heart scare, returning to his practice with the same authoritative confidence that had defined his career. When he called to discuss the upcoming holiday plans, his voice carried no hint of a man harboring decades-old secrets. "Your mother's planning the usual Christmas dinner," he said. "Thomas and Rebecca will bring the twins, of course. Your mother mentioned you might be bringing someone?" This was typical, the subtle pressure to present a complete picture, to arrive with a suitable partner rather than alone. Eleanor had been seeing someone, a public interest environmental lawyer named Daniel, but their relationship was still new. She had hesitated to involve him in the family drama she knew might unfold. "No, Dad. Just me this year," she replied. The pause on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Well, that's fine too, dear. Your mother just likes to have an accurate head count." Eleanor recognized the familiar disappointment in his tone. At 32, still single, focused on her career rather than starting a family, these were deviations from the Mitchell family script. In previous years, she might have scrambled to meet their expectations, perhaps inviting a casual date just to fill the empty chair. But now, knowing what she knew, their disapproval seemed hollow. When she arrived at the family home on Christmas Eve, The house was decorated with Victoria Mitchell's trademark perfection, tasteful greenery, carefully coordinated ornaments on the 12-foot tree, and a collection of heirloom angels displayed on the mantel. Family photos lined the hallway, telling the curated story of the Mitchell family: vacations at Martha's Vineyard, Thomas's medical school graduation, Eleanor's college commencement. There were no photos of Judith. Thomas and his wife Rebecca arrived with their 4-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, bringing a chaotic energy into the precisely arranged home. Eleanor had always enjoyed her role as aunt, finding her brother's children to be a welcome distraction during family gatherings. This year, she hugged them fiercely, wondering if they too would someday discover that their family history had been sanitized for public consumption. Christmas morning brought the exchange of lavish gifts. Victoria and Richard had always been generous with material things, if somewhat withholding with unconditional approval. Eleanor received an expensive cashmere sweater, a gift certificate for a spa weekend, and a not-so-subtle self-help book titled Finding Balance. Career and Personal Fulfillment for Modern Women. I thought this might give you some perspective, Victoria said, as Eleanor unwrapped the book. Rebecca read it last year and found it quite insightful. Didn't you, dear? She turned to her daughter-in-law, who nodded obligingly. Eleanor forced a smile, placing the book aside. Thanks, Mom. I'll add it to my reading list. The Christmas dinner itself was a showcase of Victoria's entertaining prowess: prime rib cooked to perfection, roasted vegetables arranged by color, and her famous cranberry compote served in crystal dishes. The dining room table gleamed with polished silver and the wedding china that only emerged for special occasions. The conversation flowed along familiar channels, Thomas discussing an interesting case at his pediatric practice, Rebecca sharing anecdotes about the twins' preschool adventures, Richard holding court with his views on the latest medical research. Eleanor contributed appropriately, answering questions about her work at the hospital administration office with carefully edited highlights. It was during dessert, Victoria's traditional bûche de Noël served with coffee in paper-thin porcelain cups, that the conversation turned to Eleanor's personal life. Eleanor, Victoria began, stirring a precise half-teaspoon of sugar into her coffee. Thomas mentioned he ran into Mark Whitman at the hospital fundraiser last month. He's divorced now, you know, and he specifically asked about you. Eleanor took a measured breath. Mark was the son of her father's former colleague, a successful dermatologist who had briefly dated Eleanor in college before she ended things, finding him pleasant but ultimately self-absorbed. That's nice, Mom, but I'm not interested in Mark, she replied. You're always so quick to dismiss potential partners, Victoria said, her voice taking on the familiar edge of disappointment. At your age, you might want to be more open-minded. Eleanor felt a flush of irritation. I date, Mom. I just haven't met someone I want to bring home yet. Dating casually at 32 isn't the same as building a future, Victoria persisted. Rebecca was already married with the twins on the way at your age. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, everyone has their own timeline. But Victoria wasn't deterred. I'm just concerned about your priorities, Eleanor. All work and no personal life isn't healthy. Your father and I have built a wonderful life together, and we want the same for you. Eleanor looked at her mother's perfectly composed face, seeing for the first time how much of Victoria's identity was wrapped up in the family image she had constructed. A successful husband, 2 children who followed the prescribed path, grandchildren arriving on schedule, these were the metrics by which Victoria measured success. I'm actually seeing someone, Eleanor said suddenly, surprising herself. His name is Daniel. He's an environmental lawyer. The silence that followed was immediate and telling. Her father's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Her mother's smile froze in place. Environmental law? Richard finally said. That's an interesting field. He works on cases involving corporate pollution and regulatory compliance, Eleanor continued, watching her parents carefully. He's particularly focused on medical waste disposal issues. Victoria's cup clattered slightly against its saucer. Well, that sounds very activist. It is, Eleanor agreed. He believes corporations should be held accountable when they prioritize profits over public health. Rather like grandmother Judith did. The name fell like a bomb at the perfectly set table. Thomas looked confused. Rebecca, who had married into the family after the scandal, glanced uncertainly between her in-laws. Victoria's face had drained of color. We don't discuss that woman in this house. Why not? Eleanor asked, years of suppressed questions finally breaking through. Because she tried to protect people from being poisoned? Because she expected her son-in-law to behave ethically? Because she valued truth over family image? Eleanor. Richard's voice carried the authority he wielded in hospital corridors. That's enough. No, it's not nearly enough, Eleanor replied, her heart pounding. I've spent my entire life being the perfect daughter, never questioning why my grandmother was erased from our family history. I deserve to know the truth. Victoria's expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. You have no idea what you're talking about. Judith was a troubled woman who invented conspiracy theories to get attention. She tried to destroy your father's career out of spite. I've seen the evidence, Mom, Eleanor said quietly. The lab reports. The internal memos. The court documents. I know exactly what happened. Richard pushed his chair back from the table. Whatever you think you've found is ancient history and taken completely out of context. Your grandmother was unwell. Stop lying. Eleanor's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. I spoke with Rachel Winters. I've read the original news coverage. I know that Dad and his colleagues invested in a disposal company that dumped medical waste illegally. I know that people got sick. I know that when Grandmother Judith tried to expose it, you cut her out of the family completely. The twins, sensing the tension, began to fidget. Rebecca murmured something about taking them into the other room, but Victoria waved her back into her seat. This is what happens, Victoria said, her voice trembling with anger, when you reject the values we've tried to instill in you. Running around digging up ancient grievances, consorting with environmental activists. Frankly, Eleanor, your father and I are ashamed of you. The words hung in the air, sharp and irretrievable. The perfect daughter. The disappointment. The shame. We're ashamed of you. Victoria's words echoed in the sudden silence of the dining room. Eleanor felt a curious calm descend over her, as if the statement had finally severed whatever need for approval had kept her tethered to her parents' expectations all these years. You're ashamed of me, Eleanor repeated softly. For discovering the truth about our family. For questioning the narrative you created. She looked around the immaculate dining room with its carefully curated holiday decorations, the family portraits displaying moments of manufactured harmony, the expensive china that held Victoria's perfectly executed Christmas dessert. It all seemed suddenly hollow, a stage set for a performance of family values that had never truly existed. Let me tell you what I'm ashamed of, Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside her. I'm ashamed that my father knowingly invested in a company that poisoned the community he took an oath to heal. I'm ashamed that my mother chose to protect that secret instead of protecting innocent people. And I'm ashamed that you erased a woman of principle and courage from our family history because her integrity threatened your comfortable lies. Richard's face had grown flushed, a dangerous color for a man with a heart condition. You have no right to judge decisions made before you were even born, he said, his voice uncharacteristically defensive. The situation with that disposal company was complex. There were misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Eleanor interrupted, pulling from her purse the file of documents she had brought, anticipating this moment might come. She extracted a photocopy of a memo and slid it across the table. This internal company document specifically mentions consulting with physician investors, including you, Dad, about methods to streamline disposal costs by reclassifying certain waste products. People got cancer from those streamlined methods. Thomas leaned forward, picking up the document with a furrowed brow. As a doctor himself, his expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as he read. Dad, he questioned, looking up at their father. Is this accurate? Did you know about this? Richard's silence was damning. Victoria jumped in, her voice tight with controlled panic. Your father was a passive investor. He trusted the company executives. When the issues came to light, he was as shocked as anyone. Eleanor pulled out another document, the handwritten statement from Judith that had never made it into the public record. Grandmother Judith's statement says otherwise. She wrote that Dad specifically mentioned innovative cost-cutting measures and assured her it was all technically legal. Where did you get that? Victoria demanded, her composure fracturing. From the county records office, Eleanor replied calmly. It's all public information, Mom. The truth has been sitting in file cabinets all these years while you've been erasing Grandmother Judith from our family albums. Rebecca, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. I don't understand. Why haven't I heard anything about this? About Eleanor's grandmother? Because they buried it, Eleanor answered before her parents could respond. They used their social connections and Dad's position at the hospital to discredit Grandmother Judith. They painted her as mentally unstable, as attention-seeking. They made sure the story died quickly and that their names were distanced from the worst of it. Victoria's hands trembled as she folded her napkin with precise movements. Your grandmother was determined to make your father into some kind of villain. She couldn't accept that there was a misunderstanding. She chose her crusade over her family. No, Mom, Eleanor said firmly. She chose to stand up for what was right, even when it cost her everything. You're the one who chose image over integrity. You're the one who cut her off from her grandchildren because she wouldn't help maintain the family lie. The twins had grown restless in the tense atmosphere. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking in a stage whisper if they could be excused. Rebecca nodded, and the children slipped away from the table, their innocent departure highlighting the weight of decades-old decisions that still haunted the room. Thomas was still reading through the documents Eleanor had brought, his medical training allowing him to fully comprehend the technical details of the waste disposal violations and their potential health impacts. These chemicals, he said, looking up at his father with disbelief, could cause developmental disorders, cancer, liver damage. How could you have been part of this? Richard's authoritative facade had crumbled, revealing an old man confronted with sins he had convinced himself were buried securely in the past. It was a different time, he said weakly. Regulations were still evolving. We didn't fully understand. That's not true, Eleanor cut in. The reports show that the company executives, and their physician investors, were specifically advised of the risks by their own safety consultants. You chose to ignore those warnings for profit. And what would you have had us do? Victoria suddenly burst out, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering completely. Admit involvement in a scandal that would have destroyed your father's career? That would have ruined our standing in the community? That would have left us ostracized and possibly facing lawsuits? Would that have made you happy, Eleanor? The raw desperation in her mother's voice momentarily took Eleanor back. For the first time, she glimpsed the fear that had driven her mother's actions. Not just the desire to maintain social status, but genuine terror of losing everything. I would have wanted you to take responsibility, Eleanor said more gently. To make amends to the affected families. To honor Grandmother Judith's courage rather than punishing her for it. A heavy silence fell over the table. The perfect Christmas dinner lay in ruins, desserts half-eaten, coffee grown cold in delicate cups. I found something else, Eleanor said finally, reaching once more into her file. She withdrew the photograph Rachel Winters had given her, Judith standing proudly in the community garden. This was taken at the remediation site. After the company was finally forced to clean up the contaminated area, the community planted a garden there. Grandmother Judith helped create it. She passed the photo to Thomas, who studied it carefully before handing it to Rebecca. When it reached Victoria, she stared at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "She has your eyes," Thomas observed quietly to Eleanor. "Or I guess you have hers." Victoria placed the photograph down without comment, but her hand lingered on it briefly. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor continued. "The garden is still there. It's called the Judith Mitchell Memorial Garden now. After she died, the community dedicated it to her. People still remember what she did, even if we pretended she never existed." Richard pushed his chair back from the table abruptly, standing with difficulty. "I need some air," he muttered, leaving the dining room without looking at any of them. Victoria remained seated, staring at the ruins of her perfect Christmas dinner. "You've certainly accomplished your goal," she said bitterly. "You've destroyed a lovely family gathering with ancient grievances." "No, Mom," Eleanor replied, feeling a deep sadness beneath her determination. "I didn't destroy anything. I'm just finally acknowledging the truth that's been hidden from me my entire life. I deserve to know who my grandmother was. I deserve to know why she was erased from our family." As the implications of Eleanor's revelations continued to sink in, the dining room fell into an uncomfortable silence. This was the moment of truth, the pivot point that would determine whether the Mitchell family could rebuild on a foundation of honesty or would continue to fracture under the weight of long-buried secrets. "I know we're at an intense turning point in this family drama, and I can see you're as invested as I am in what happens next. Will Eleanor's family come to terms with their dark past? Can Victoria ever accept the truth about her own mother?" Before we continue to the aftermath of this Christmas dinner confrontation, take a quick second to hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up for the truth in your family, and subscribe to my channel for more real stories about family secrets and justice. Comment below if you think Eleanor was right to bring everything to light or if some family secrets should stay buried. Now, let's see how this revelation changes everything for the Mitchell family. The days following Christmas unfolded in a series of aftershocks. Eleanor returned to her apartment the evening of the confrontation, declining Victoria's mechanical offer to stay the night. The drive home had been surreal, Christmas lights blurring through her tears, holiday music on the radio creating a jarring contrast to the emotional devastation she had just experienced. Her phone remained conspicuously silent that night and throughout the following day. No calls from her mother demanding she apologize. No texts from her father attempting to justify his actions. The silence itself was unprecedented in a family where appearances were managed so carefully, where conflicts were smoothed over with practiced efficiency. Thomas was the first to reach out, calling on December 27 as Eleanor was mindlessly organizing her kitchen cabinets, seeking order in at least one aspect of her life. "That was quite a Christmas dinner," he said when she answered, his usual good humor subdued. "I'm sorry it happened that way," Eleanor replied, realizing she meant it. Not sorry for revealing the truth, but sorry for the pain it had caused, pain that had been inevitable regardless of how the revelation occurred. "I've been reading up on the whole situation," Thomas continued. "Found the old news articles online. Talked to some of the senior doctors at the hospital who were around back then. It's pretty much like you said." Eleanor leaned against her counter, closing her eyes. "I wasn't making it up, Tom. I know that now," he said quietly. "I guess I'm trying to process how the parents I've always known could have done something like this. Not just Dad's involvement in the waste disposal, but how they treated grandmother Judith. How they erased her. Have you talked to them?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. "I tried," Thomas sighed. "Dad's barricaded himself in his study. Mom's on a cleaning frenzy, I stopped by yesterday and found her reorganizing the entire linen closet at 7 a.m., acting like nothing happened. Rebecca's upset too. She feels like she married into a family with this huge secret history no one bothered to tell her about. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. I never meant to hurt you or Rebecca. You were kept in the dark just like I was. I know, Thomas assured her. Actually, Rebecca's the one who suggested I call you. She said what you did was brave, even if the timing was dramatic. A small laugh escaped Eleanor. Not how I planned to drop the family bombshell. Mom's comment really pushed you over the edge, huh? Thomas asked. We're ashamed of you, Eleanor quoted. After everything they did, after all the lies, they had the audacity to be ashamed of me for finding out the truth. The siblings fell silent for a moment, each contemplating the unraveling of their family mythology. The twins keep asking about their great-grandmother now, Thomas said eventually. They want to know about the garden with her name on it. I told them we'd visit it when the weather gets warmer. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes at the thought of Thomas's children learning about Judith, acknowledging her existence, carrying her memory forward. She would have loved that, she whispered. The next person to contact Eleanor, surprisingly, was her father. The call came 3 days after Christmas, as she was preparing to return to work after the holiday break. Eleanor, Richard said when she answered, his voice lacking its usual authority. I think we need to talk. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop, neutral territory away from the family home. Eleanor arrived early, securing a quiet corner table and ordering herbal tea to calm her nerves. When Richard entered, she was struck by how much older he looked than he had just days before, as if the confrontation had accelerated his aging process. He settled across from her, declining her offer to order him coffee. For a long moment, he simply studied her face, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. You look like her, he finally said. Like Judith. I should have noticed it sooner. Eleanor waited, giving him space to continue. What you said at Christmas, Richard began, choosing his words carefully, about my involvement with Piedmont Disposal Services. It's not entirely inaccurate. Eleanor noted the careful qualification, not entirely inaccurate, rather than a full admission. Still, it was more acknowledgement than she had expected. I was approached by a colleague about an investment opportunity, Richard continued. The projected returns were exceptional. There were discussions about innovative approaches to waste management, but it was all presented as cutting-edge technology, not corner-cutting. By the time concerns were raised, I was deeply invested, financially and professionally. And when grandmother Judith confronted you about it? Eleanor prompted. Richard's gaze dropped to the tabletop. Judith was formidable. Unyielding. She demanded I divest immediately and publicly expose the company's practices. Which would have implicated you as well, Eleanor concluded. Yes, Richard admitted. I had my practice to consider. My reputation. My family's security. I tried to explain to Judith that these situations were complex, that immediate action could be destructive to everyone involved. I suggested working within the system to address the issues gradually. Eleanor felt a surge of anger. While people continued to be exposed to dangerous chemicals? Richard flinched visibly. I convinced myself the risks were being exaggerated. That the science wasn't conclusive. It's remarkably easy to believe something when your financial interests align with that belief. The raw honesty of this statement momentarily disarmed Eleanor. She had expected continued denials, not this partial reckoning. When Judith went public, Richard continued, it felt like betrayal. Like she was choosing strangers over family loyalty. Victoria was devastated, caught between her husband and her mother. I pushed her to make a choice. And she chose you, Eleanor said softly. She chose what she believed was protecting her family, Richard corrected. Victoria has always prioritized family stability above all else. The idea of a public scandal, of social ostracism, was her worst nightmare. So you cut grandmother Judith out completely? Pretended she didn't exist? Kept her from knowing her grandchildren? Richard aged another decade before Eleanor's eyes. Those decisions, they seemed necessary at the time. Once made, they were difficult to unmake. How do you explain to your children that you've kept their grandmother from them? That you publicly denounced her as unstable? The years passed, and the lie became entrenched. They sat in silence, the ambient noise of the coffee shop creating a cocoon around their painful conversation. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard finally said. "I don't expect it. But I wanted you to know that what happened at Christmas dinner, it forced me to confront things I've avoided thinking about for decades." Eleanor studied her father, the man she had idolized throughout her childhood, whose approval she had sought so desperately. She saw now the flawed, frightened human behind the authoritative facade. "What happens now?" she asked. Richard straightened slightly. "I've contacted my lawyer. I'm establishing a scholarship fund in Judith's name for students pursuing environmental science. I'm also making a significant donation to the community organization that maintains her memorial garden." Eleanor noted the careful focus on financial remedies, typical of her father to believe problems could be solved with money rather than emotional accountability. "And Mom?" she asked. Richard's expression clouded. "Your mother is struggling. Her entire worldview has been challenged. The family narrative she constructed so carefully has collapsed. She doesn't know who she is outside of that narrative." "Will she ever speak to me again?" Eleanor asked, surprised by how much the answer still mattered to her. "Give her time," Richard said. "Victoria is nothing if not pragmatic. Once the initial shock passes, she'll find a way to incorporate this new reality into her understanding of the world. Whether that includes reconciliation with you, that's something only time will tell." As Eleanor left the coffee shop, she felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The perfect daughter had finally broken free of the perfect family myth, but the cost had been steep. January brought bitter cold to Asheville and a new kind of solitude for Eleanor. The comfortable routines of her life. The Sunday phone calls with her mother, the monthly dinners at her parents' home, the family group text where Victoria shared articles and Thomas posted photos of the twins, had all fallen silent. At work, Eleanor moved through her administrative duties with a distracted efficiency, her mind constantly returning to the family fracture. Her colleagues noticed the change, but attributed it to post-holiday blues or perhaps a romantic disappointment. Only Daniel, the environmental lawyer she had been seeing, knew the full story. She had finally told him everything during a quiet dinner at her apartment a week after Christmas. "I mentioned you at Christmas dinner," she admitted as they cleared the plates. "Said you were an environmental lawyer focused on medical waste issues." "I think it was the match that lit the powder keg." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So I'm the boyfriend who ruined Christmas?" That's quite an introduction to the family. His wry humor broke through Eleanor's melancholy, drawing a genuine laugh. "The family was already in ruins," she replied. "We just hadn't admitted it yet." As January progressed, Eleanor found unexpected comfort in Daniel's perspective. Unlike friends who urged reconciliation for reconciliation's sake, family is family, Eleanor. You only get 1 inch. Daniel understood the ethical complexity of her situation. Some breaches can't be papered over with holiday togetherness, he observed one evening as they walked through the snow-covered park near Eleanor's apartment. Sometimes accountability has to come before reconciliation. Eleanor squeezed his gloved hand gratefully. "Everyone else thinks I should just apologize for causing a scene and move on." "That's because confronting injustice is uncomfortable," Daniel replied. "People prefer the appearance of harmony to the messy work of addressing underlying wrongs." His words echoed what Eleanor imagined her grandmother Judith might have said, strengthening her resolve to honor the truth, however painful. The most surprising development came in mid-January, when Eleanor received an email from an unfamiliar address, r.winters@greenhaven.org. The subject line read simply, "Judith would be proud." Rachel Winters, Eleanor's grandmother's former friend and fellow activist, had heard through community channels about the scholarship fund Richard Mitchell was establishing in Judith's name. "Word travels fast in environmental circles," Rachel wrote. "Several people have contacted me about this unexpected development. I gather that you have something to do with this change of heart in your father?" Eleanor replied, giving Rachel a condensed version of the Christmas confrontation and its aftermath. Rachel's response came quickly. "I would very much like to meet with you again. There are things about your grandmother that I think you should know, things that might help you navigate this difficult family situation." They arranged to meet at Rachel's apartment the following weekend. When Eleanor arrived, she found not only Rachel waiting for her, but 3 other older women as well, each regarding her with curious, welcoming expressions. "Eleanor, meet the rest of the water warriors," Rachel said with a smile. "This is Denise, Patricia, and Helen. Together with your grandmother, we formed the core of the Citizens Coalition that fought the medical waste battle." The women welcomed Eleanor warmly, each embracing her as if she were a long-lost relative. In many ways, she realized, these women had been more Judith's family than her actual relatives during those difficult years. Over tea and homemade cookies, they shared stories about Judith that painted a vivid picture of the grandmother Eleanor had never known, her strategic mind, her unexpected humor, her kindness to neighbors affected by the contamination, her unshakable principles. "She kept a photo of you on her refrigerator," Helen told Eleanor. Even years after she moved to Oregon, that picture was the first thing she put up in her new kitchen. "She never stopped loving her daughter, either," Patricia added more gently. Judith understood that Victoria was caught in an impossible position. She was angry about the choice Victoria made, but she never stopped hoping for reconciliation. Eleanor absorbed these insights hungrily, building a mental image of the grandmother who had been erased from her life. Did she ever regret what she did? Going public with the information about the disposal company? The 4 women exchanged glances. "No," Rachel said definitively. She regretted the cost, losing her family, but never the action itself. Judith believed that some principles transcend even family loyalty. She used to quote something, Denise recalled. "The truth may cost me dearly, but the lies would cost others their health and perhaps their lives." Eleanor felt tears welling up. That sounds like something worth living by. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation shifted from past to present. Eleanor learned that all 4 women had remained active in environmental causes, though their methods had evolved over the decades. "We're more savvy now about working within systems," Helen explained. "Using legal channels, building coalitions with business leaders, finding economic arguments for environmental protection. But the core principle remains, speaking truth to power." Before Eleanor left, Rachel disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. "Judith left this with me before she moved to Oregon. She asked me to give it to you if you ever came looking for the truth. I've held on to it all these years, hoping this day would come." With trembling hands, Eleanor accepted the box. Inside, she found a collection of small treasures. A handwritten letter addressed to her, several birthday and Christmas cards Judith had never been able to give her, a delicate silver necklace with a tree pendant, and a journal filled with Judith's thoughts and reflections during the environmental campaign. "She wanted you to know her," Rachel said simply. "Not the version of her that your parents created, but the real woman, with all her strengths and flaws." Eleanor clutched the box to her chest, overwhelmed by this tangible connection to her grandmother. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you. For keeping her memory alive. For being her family when her blood relatives failed her." As Eleanor prepared to leave, Rachel walked her to the door. Judith faced a terrible choice, the older woman said quietly. Family loyalty versus her moral compass. You faced a similar choice, and you chose as she did, truth over comfortable lies. Don't underestimate how much courage that takes. Eleanor drove home with Judith's box beside her, feeling a profound shift in her understanding of family. The Mitchell family she had known, polished, perfect, and hollow, had fractured beyond repair. But perhaps something more authentic could emerge from the wreckage. And perhaps family could be defined more broadly than blood, encompassing those who shared your values, who supported your growth, who honored truth alongside love. That evening, Eleanor opened Judith's letter with reverent care. The handwriting was firm and clear, the ink faded but still legible after all these years. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you are reading this, then you have discovered the truth that others tried to hide from you. I want you to know that every difficult choice I made with the future in mind, your future, and the future of all children who deserve clean water, honest leaders, and a world where integrity matters more than image. As she read her grandmother's words, Eleanor felt a presence in the room, not supernatural, but the undeniable force of Judith's spirit, finally heard after decades of enforced silence. February brought the first hints of spring to Asheville, tentative crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, daylight lingering a little longer each evening. For Eleanor, it also brought an unexpected invitation. The text came from Thomas, Mom wants to see you. Sunday at 3. Just you two. No Dad, no me, no Rebecca or kids. You up for it? Eleanor stared at her phone, her heart racing. After weeks of silence, this overture from Victoria seemed both promising and terrifying. Did she say why? She texted back. Not really, Thomas replied. But she's been different since Christmas. Quieter. She asked me for Rachel Winter's contact information last week. This detail startled Eleanor more than the invitation itself. Her mother, reaching out to her grandmother's closest ally? The woman Victoria had dismissed for decades as a troublemaking activist? I'll be there, Eleanor responded after a moment's hesitation. Sunday arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth. Eleanor chose her outfit carefully, not the power suit she might have worn as armor, nor the carefully casual clothes she typically wore to family gatherings. Instead, she opted for a simple blue dress that made her feel both strong and authentic. Around her neck hung the silver tree pendant from Judith's box, a tangible connection to her grandmother as she prepared to face her mother. Victoria opened the front door before Eleanor could ring the bell. Her appearance was subtly altered, her immaculate bob slightly less rigid, her makeup more minimal than her usual perfect application. Most striking was the absence of her customary pearl necklace, a Mitchell family heirloom that Victoria had worn religiously for as long as Eleanor could remember. Thank you for coming, Victoria said, her voice formal but not cold. The house felt different too. The family photos in the hallway had been rearranged, Eleanor noticed immediately. Where there had previously been a careful curation of Mitchell family milestones, there were now several unfamiliar frames. As Victoria led her toward the sunroom at the back of the house, Eleanor paused before one particular photograph. It showed a younger Victoria, perhaps in her 20s, standing beside an older woman with Eleanor's eyes and determined chin. They were in a garden, both smiling, Victoria's head resting affectionately on the older woman's shoulder. That's you and Grandmother Judith, Eleanor said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Victoria paused, following Eleanor's gaze. Yes, she confirmed simply. Before everything happened. Before I made my choice. In the sunroom, Victoria had prepared tea, not in the delicate porcelain reserved for guests, but in sturdy mugs that Eleanor recognized from everyday family use when she was growing up. A plate of slightly burnt cookies sat on the table between them. I made these myself, Victoria said, gesturing to the cookies with a self-deprecating smile. Without Mrs. Harmon's help. They're not quite right, but... She trailed off with a small shrug that was so uncharacteristic of her usual precision that Eleanor stared in bewilderment. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes that the old Victoria would never have tolerated. "I've been to the garden," Victoria finally said, her voice so quiet Eleanor had to lean forward to hear her. "Judith's garden." "I hadn't been there, not since the dedication ceremony after she died. I sent flowers but didn't attend in person." Eleanor nodded, waiting. "It's beautiful," Victoria continued. "Well maintained. There's a plaque with her picture and a quote, 'Some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost.'" Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her mug. "I spoke with Rachel Winters," she added. "She told me things about your grandmother's last years. How she never stopped hoping we would reconcile. How she kept a photo of me beside her bed until the day she died." Eleanor felt tears threatening but held them back. This moment seemed too fragile for emotional displays. "I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas," Victoria continued. "About me choosing image over integrity. About erasing Judith from our family history." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "You weren't wrong." The admission hung in the air between them, perhaps the most honest thing Victoria had ever said to her daughter. "When your father asked me to choose," Victoria continued, "it didn't feel like choosing between right and wrong. It felt like choosing between my mother and my husband, between public scandal and family stability. I told myself I was protecting our family, protecting you and Thomas from upheaval." She looked directly at Eleanor for the first time since they sat down. "But that wasn't the whole truth. I was protecting myself too, from social embarrassment, from difficult questions, from the possibility that I had married a man capable of putting profit above people's health." Eleanor reached across the table, hesitantly covering her mother's hand with her own. Victoria didn't pull away. "The hardest part," Victoria admitted, "has been facing that your grandmother was right. She was right about the disposal company, right about your father's knowledge, right to stand up for the truth even when it cost her everything." Tears slid down Victoria's cheeks now, her careful composure finally crumbling completely. "And I punished her for being right. I denied her the chance to know her grandchildren. I denied you the chance to know her." Eleanor felt her own tears falling freely. "Why are you telling me this now?" Victoria wiped her cheeks with a determined gesture. "Because you deserve the truth. Because Judith deserved better than what I gave her. And because I've spent decades constructing a perfect family image that was hollow at its core." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, another departure from her usual tailored style, and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, she removed a ring set with a single emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was your grandmother's," Victoria said, placing it on the table between them. "My father gave it to her on their 20th anniversary. She left it for me when she moved to Oregon, with a note saying it should go to you someday, her first granddaughter." Eleanor stared at the ring, this tangible connection between 3 generations of women, her grandmother, her mother, and herself. "I almost threw it away," Victoria admitted. "In those first angry months after she went public with her accusations. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I hid it away with her letters, her photos, all the evidence of her existence that I purged from our family's visible life." Eleanor picked up the ring, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Your father and I," Victoria continued after a moment, we're reassessing many things. About our marriage. About the choices we've made." Eleanor looked up in surprise. This was more than she had expected. An admission of family secrets was one thing, but a suggestion that her parents' seemingly perfect marriage might be unraveling was quite another. "Richard is not a bad man," Victoria said, seeming to read Eleanor's thoughts. "But he made bad choices, and I helped him hide them. For decades, we've been partners in maintaining this fiction of perfect lives. I'm not sure who we are without that fiction. And you? Eleanor asked gently. Who are you without the fiction? Victoria's smile was sad but somehow more genuine than any expression Eleanor had seen on her mother's face in years. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I think I might be more like my mother than I've ever allowed myself to acknowledge. The admission hung between them, not quite reconciliation, but the first honest foundation upon which reconciliation might eventually be built. I can't undo what was done to Judith, Victoria said. I can't go back and make different choices. But I can stop perpetuating the lie. I can acknowledge who she really was, not the convenient villain we created. And I can try to honor her memory by finally telling the truth. Eleanor nodded, tears still flowing. She would have wanted that, she said softly. In her letter to me, she wrote that she never stopped loving you, even when she couldn't understand your choices. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this. Did she suffer at the end? No, Eleanor assured her, drawing on what Rachel had told her. She was surrounded by friends. She had built a new life in Oregon, working with environmental groups there. She was respected, loved. She found purpose. But she never stopped missing you. They sat together as the afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the sunroom floor. The conversation moved to practical matters, Victoria's decision to volunteer at the community garden bearing Judith's name, her tentative plans to establish a family history project that would restore Judith's place in the Mitchell narrative, her hope that when the twins were a bit older, they could learn about their great-grandmother's courage. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Victoria walked her to the door. At the threshold, Victoria paused, looking at the silver tree pendant around Eleanor's neck. I gave her that, she said softly. For her 50th birthday. She always loved trees, their strength, their endurance. Eleanor touched the pendant. I've been wearing it every day since I found it. Victoria nodded. It suits you. She hesitated, then added, You're like her, you know. Not just your eyes, but your spirit. Your determination to speak the truth, even when it's difficult. Coming from Victoria, who had spent decades trying to mold Eleanor into a different kind of woman entirely, this comparison to Judith felt like the highest compliment. Thank you for coming today, Victoria said formally as they reached the door. Then, with visible effort to break through decades of emotional reserve, she added, I love you, Eleanor. I haven't always shown it the right way, but I do. Eleanor embraced her mother, not the perfect, polished Victoria Mitchell who had presided over immaculate holiday dinners and maintained the family's flawless image, but the flawed, complex woman who was finally allowing herself to be seen. I love you too, Mom, she whispered. As Eleanor drove away from her childhood home, she felt Judith's presence stronger than ever, not as a ghost, but as a legacy finally acknowledged, a truth finally honored, a family circle finally, imperfectly, completed. In the months that followed, the Mitchell family would continue to change. Richard would step back from his medical practice, focusing instead on making amends through substantial contributions to environmental health initiatives. Victoria would slowly dismantle the perfect facade she had maintained for decades, finding a new authenticity in honoring her mother's memory. Thomas and Rebecca would bring the twins to help plant flowers in Judith's memorial garden. Eleanor and Daniel would continue to grow closer, their relationship strengthened by the honesty that had been its foundation from the beginning. And Eleanor herself would carry forward her grandmother's legacy, not by erasing the painful past, but by acknowledging it, not by demanding perfection, but by valuing truth, not by choosing image over integrity, but by recognizing that some principles are indeed worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Wow, what a journey this has been, sharing my family's story with all of you. I never imagined when I stood up to my mother at that Christmas dinner that it would lead to such healing and transformation. I'm curious, have you ever had to confront a family secret or stand up for the truth when it was difficult? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story of family karma and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic stories about life's complicated relationships. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need the courage to speak their truth or who's struggling with family conflict. Thank you so much for being here and listening to my journey. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important healing, and I'm grateful I could share these life lessons with you today. Remember, the truth may be painful, but living with integrity brings a peace that no perfect family image ever could.